Samuel Hayes froze mid-step on the forest trail, his ranger flashlight beam catching the glint of steel and fresh blood pooled beneath the massive black bear standing between him and his estranged brother's hunting rifle. The metallic click of Marcus chambering another round echoed through the October darkness. This wasn't the reunion he'd imagined after 18 months of silence. Martha Whitfield's scream pierced the night from somewhere behind the trees, her weathered hands clutching her chest as she witnessed the standoff. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with pine needles and the copper scent of Samuel's blood dripping from his shoulder wound. Eleanor's voice cracked through his radio. "Sam, where are you? I heard gunshots." The same desperate tone she'd used the night they lost Billy 3 years ago, when everything fell apart. "Drop the weapon, Marcus." Samuel's command belied the tremor in his voice as he stared into his brother's hollow, meth-ravaged eyes. What had driven his own flesh and blood to murder that bear cub's mother? And would Scar's fierce loyalty cost them all their lives tonight? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 3 years ago, Samuel Hayes had been a different man. Back then, his biggest worry was whether 8-year-old Billy remembered to wear his life jacket during their weekend fishing trips to Crater Lake. The boy had inherited his mother's stubborn streak and his father's love for the water, a combination that kept Samuel constantly vigilant yet perpetually proud. Eleanor used to joke that Sam loved that lake more than he loved her, watching him teach Billy to cast lines and identify fish species with the patience of a saint. "You're raising a little marine biologist," she'd say, braiding wildflowers into her auburn hair while the two Hayes men bonded over bass and rainbow trout. Then came that August afternoon when everything shattered. Billy had been swimming near the dock while Samuel secured their gear. One moment of turned attention, one loose life jacket strap, one unexpected current. By the time Samuel dove in, his son had already slipped beneath the surface, pulled down by the very waters that had brought them such joy. The divorce papers arrived 6 months later. Eleanor couldn't bear to look at the man who'd failed to protect their child, and Samuel couldn't blame her. She moved to Portland, took a job at Children's Hospital, and threw herself into saving other people's kids since she couldn't save her own. Samuel retreated to the Cascade Mountain Wildlife Reserve, accepting a ranger position in the most remote sector available. 50,000 acres of pristine wilderness where the only children were the baby deer and bear cubs he observed from a professional distance. The job came with strict regulations. Observe, document, but never interfere. Nature's course was sacred, even when it meant watching the weak perish. His cabin sat 12 miles from headquarters, accessible only by a winding dirt road that most vehicles couldn't navigate. Perfect for a man who'd lost faith in his ability to protect anything precious. The isolation suited him, broken only by weekly visits from Martha Whitfield, the 72-year-old rancher whose property bordered the reserve. Martha had buried her husband Harold 5 years prior and understood the particular ache of an empty house. She'd arrive every Tuesday with homemade apple pie and unsolicited advice, treating Samuel like the son she'd never had. "Honey, some wounds ain't meant to heal," she'd say in her weathered voice. "They're meant to teach." Samuel's older brother Marcus had been conspicuously absent during the worst period. Once a successful contractor with a thriving business in Bend, Marcus had lost everything in the 2008 recession. Their father's golden boy had fallen hard, and pride prevented him from asking for help. Samuel heard rumors through old family friends, bankruptcy, addiction, increasingly desperate attempts to reclaim his former status. But the wilderness had rules, and Samuel followed them religiously. No interference meant no responsibility for outcomes. No responsibility meant no guilt when things went wrong. It was a cold comfort, but for a man who'd failed at the most important job in the world, keeping his child safe, it was the only comfort available. Until that April morning when he heard crying in the forest, The whimpering carried on the morning breeze like a child's cry, stopping Samuel dead in his tracks during what should have been a routine patrol along Devil's Creek. He'd been documenting water levels for the monthly report when the sound pierced through the forest's natural symphony of birdsong and rustling leaves. Samuel's hand instinctively moved to his radio, then hesitated. Protocol demanded he report any wildlife distress immediately to headquarters, where Dr. Patricia Wells would dispatch a team to assess the situation. But something about the desperation in that cry made him pause. It reminded him too much of another sound he'd heard 3 years ago, when Billy had called out for help from the dark waters of Crater Lake. Following the sound through a thicket of mountain laurel, Samuel discovered a sight that would haunt him forever. A black bear cub, no more than 6 months old, lay trapped in an illegal steel leg-hold trap. The device's serrated jaws had clamped around the animal's right rear leg, cutting through flesh and muscle nearly to the bone. Dark blood pooled in the muddy depression, where the cub had obviously struggled for hours, maybe days. The little bear's breathing came in shallow, rapid pants. Its round black eyes, dulled by pain and exhaustion, fixed on Samuel with a mixture of terror and something that looked disturbingly like hope. A distinctive cross-shaped scar marked the cub's chest, an old wound that had healed into a pale reminder of some previous trauma. Samuel's training kicked in automatically. "Easy there, little guy," he whispered, approaching with slow, deliberate movements. The cub tried to rear back but lacked the strength to do more than whimper. Its mother was nowhere to be seen, which violated every natural law Samuel understood about black bear behavior. Mother bears simply didn't abandon their cubs, especially not wounded ones. The steel trap bore no identification markings, making it completely illegal under federal wildlife protection statutes. Someone had set this deliberately, probably targeting the mother bear for her valuable gallbladder, which could fetch upwards of $10,000 on the black market. The cub had been collateral damage, left to die slowly while the poacher pursued more profitable prey. Samuel's hands trembled as he examined the trap's mechanism. Department regulations were crystal clear. Rangers were forbidden from interfering with natural processes, including predator-prey relationships, disease, and yes, even human-caused injuries to wildlife. The proper protocol was to document, photograph, and report. Let nature take its course, even when nature included human cruelty. But looking into those pain-filled eyes, Samuel saw Billy's face in the moments before the lake claimed him. The same trust, the same desperate need for someone stronger to make everything okay. The same faith that Dad would know what to do. "I'm going to get you out of there," Samuel whispered, more to himself than to the bear. It was a promise he couldn't keep for his son, but maybe, just maybe, he could keep it for this motherless cub. The trap's release mechanism required 2 people to operate safely, but Samuel was alone and the cub was fading fast. Using his emergency multi-tool, he began the painstaking process of prying apart the steel jaws. The metal was slick with blood, making his grip uncertain. Twice the tool slipped, sending fresh waves of agony through the trapped animal. On his 3rd attempt, the trap's spring mechanism caught his left hand, slicing deep into his palm. Samuel bit back a curse as his own blood mingled with the cub's. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not when those eyes kept watching him with such desperate faith. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the jaws released. The cub collapsed immediately, too weak to even attempt escape. Its mangled leg hung at an unnatural angle, and Samuel could see exposed bone through the torn flesh. Without immediate medical attention, infection would set in within hours. Samuel wrapped the tiny bear in his emergency blanket, feeling the rapid flutter of its heartbeat against his chest. The animal weighed maybe 40 pounds, light enough for him to carry, but heavy enough to make the 2-mile hike back to his truck a genuine challenge. Every step jarred the injured leg, drawing fresh whimpers that cut through Samuel's heart like razors. He couldn't take the cub to headquarters. Dr. Wells would order it euthanized immediately, citing department policy and the slim chances of successful rehabilitation. But Samuel's cabin had a storage shed behind it, hidden from view of the main road. He'd renovated it himself when he first moved in, installing electricity and running water for equipment storage. It could work as a makeshift veterinary clinic, at least temporarily. Samuel had basic medical supplies from his military days, and Martha Whitfield had mentioned her late husband's experience treating injured livestock. Between the two of them, they might be able to save this little life. The decision felt like stepping off a cliff, but for the first time in 3 years, Samuel Hayes was choosing to fight for something instead of simply documenting its decline. 6 months of secret midnight feedings had transformed both the bear cub and Samuel in ways neither could have anticipated. What started as emergency medical care had evolved into something deeper, something that reminded Samuel of the father he used to be before tragedy stripped away his confidence in protecting anything precious. The cub, whom Samuel had named Scar after the distinctive cross-shaped mark on his chest, now weighed nearly 150 pounds of solid muscle and surprising intelligence. His injured leg had healed with only a slight limp, though he moved with the fluid grace typical of his species. More remarkably, he showed no inclination to leave the cabin or venture beyond the immediate clearing where Samuel had built him a comfortable den. Martha Whitfield had discovered Samuel's secret during her third Tuesday visit, when she'd arrived early and caught him sneaking veterinary supplies from his truck. "Samuel Hayes," she'd demanded, hands planted firmly on her hips, "what in tarnation are you hiding in that shed?" The confrontation had lasted all of 10 minutes before Martha was kneeling beside Scar, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks as she stroked his thick fur. "That little one's got the same look Billy had," she'd whispered. "Pure trust, like he knows you'd never let anything hurt him." From that moment forward, Martha became Samuel's co-conspirator, bringing fresh salmon from the local market and homemade honey cakes that Scar devoured with obvious delight. She'd sit on the cabin's front porch during their visits, watching Samuel and Scar play a modified version of fetch that involved pine cones and an abundance of patience. But the idyllic routine couldn't last forever. Dr. Patricia Wells had begun conducting surprise inspections of remote ranger stations, part of a new efficiency initiative designed to ensure compliance with federal wildlife protection protocols. And Samuel knew it was only a matter of time before she discovered his violation of the most fundamental rule in wildlife management: never interfere with natural processes. The turning point came on a crisp October morning when Samuel and Scar were exploring the area near Devil's Creek where they'd first met. Samuel had been documenting seasonal changes in vegetation patterns, while Scar foraged for late-season berries with the methodical thoroughness of a creature who'd learned to trust his human companion's presence. That's when they found her. The skeletal remains lay partially hidden beneath a fallen Douglas fir, scattered by months of weather and scavenger activity. But the distinctive skull structure and size told Samuel immediately what he was looking at: an adult female black bear, probably weighing around 200 pounds when alive. Most tellingly, a clean bullet hole pierced the skull just above the left eye socket. Scar's reaction was immediate and heartbreaking. He approached the bones with careful, deliberate steps, sniffing each fragment with an intensity Samuel had never witnessed. When the bear reached what had once been his mother's skull, he sat back on his haunches and released a low, mournful sound that seemed to echo through the entire forest. Samuel's hands shook as he photographed the scene, documenting evidence of what was clearly an illegal kill. Wrapped around the mother bear's neck vertebrae, he found the corroded remains of a GPS tracking collar, the kind used by wildlife researchers to monitor animal behavior and movement patterns. The serial number was still partially legible, which meant he could trace this bear's history through the department's database. But the most damning evidence lay scattered around the kill site. Brass shell casings from a high-powered hunting rifle, and the twisted remains of several steel leg-hold traps identical to the one that had nearly killed Scar. This hadn't been a chance encounter or a defensive shooting. Someone had deliberately targeted a mother bear with cubs, using illegal traps and high-powered weapons to ensure a clean kill. Martha helped Samuel search the area more thoroughly, her sharp eyes spotting details he might have missed. They found 3 more trap sites within a half-mile radius, all bearing the same distinctive setting pattern. Professional work, suggesting someone with extensive hunting experience and complete disregard for federal wildlife protection laws. Most disturbing of all, Martha's trail camera, which she'd secretly installed to monitor Samuel's welfare, had captured footage of the original attack. The grainy infrared images showed a massive female bear deliberately leading 2 armed figures away from what must have been her den site. She'd been wounded in the initial encounter but continued running, drawing the hunters farther and farther from her hidden cub. Samuel watched the footage 3 times before the full magnitude of the mother bear's sacrifice became clear. She'd known she was dying, known the hunters would eventually bring her down. But she'd used her final moments to buy time and distance, ensuring her cub would have at least a chance of survival in the hidden den where Scar had waited for days before venturing out to find food and water. The mother bear had died protecting her child, just as Samuel had failed to protect his. Sitting on his cabin's front porch that evening, watching Scar demolish a fresh salmon with obvious contentment, Samuel made a decision that would have seemed impossible 6 months earlier. He was going to find the people responsible for this slaughter, and he was going to make sure they faced justice for what they'd done. The naive, rule-following ranger who'd pulled a dying cub from a steel trap was gone. In his place sat a man with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. A man who'd finally found something worth protecting again, even if it meant risking everything he had left. The hunt was about to begin. Samuel's investigation into the poaching network consumed the next 6 months with an intensity that bordered on obsession. What began as a quest for justice gradually transformed into something deeper, a father's delayed reckoning with his own failures to protect those he loved most. The trail camera footage from Martha's hidden devices provided the first breakthrough. Enhanced and analyzed frame by frame, the images revealed crucial details about the hunters who'd killed Scar's mother. One figure wore a distinctive red baseball cap with what appeared to be a local business logo, while the other carried a custom rifle with an unusual scope configuration that Samuel recognized from his military days. Expensive equipment favored by professional marksmen. Cross-referencing hunting license databases with recent bankruptcy filings led Samuel down a dark rabbit hole of desperate men willing to risk federal charges for quick cash. Bear gallbladders commanded premium prices on the black market, sometimes reaching $15,000 each when sold to traditional medicine practitioners in Asia. For someone facing financial ruin, a single successful hunt could mean the difference between keeping their home and losing everything. The investigation took on new urgency when Samuel discovered the scope of the operation. Trail cameras positioned throughout the reserve revealed a systematic pattern of illegal activity spanning at least 2 years. Professional trappers were targeting mother bears specifically, using GPS tracking data stolen from the Wildlife Management Database to locate denning sites during the most vulnerable period of the bear's reproductive cycle. Scar seemed to sense the change in Samuel's demeanor during these weeks of investigation. The massive bear, now approaching 300 pounds of solid muscle, had developed an uncanny ability to read human emotions. When Samuel spent long hours hunched over his laptop analyzing data, Scar would position himself nearby, those intelligent dark eyes constantly scanning for threats. When Samuel's frustration boiled over into angry outbursts at the evidence of systematic slaughter, Scar would gently bump his massive head against Samuel's shoulder, a gesture of comfort that never failed to calm the ranger's racing pulse. Martha proved invaluable during this period, her decades of experience with local personalities providing insights that official databases couldn't offer. She knew which families had fallen on hard times, which men had reputations for bending rules when money was tight, and most importantly, which individuals had the skills and equipment necessary for professional poaching operations. "That red cap in your footage," she said one Tuesday evening, studying the enhanced images on Samuel's laptop. "Looks like the logo from Blackwood Construction." They went under about 3 years ago, right around the time this mess started. The name hit Samuel like a physical blow. Blackwood Construction had been his brother Marcus's company, the pride and joy that had made their father beam with satisfaction during family gatherings. Marcus, the golden child who'd inherited their father's business acumen and charm, while Samuel had chosen the military and later conservation work. But Marcus had been absent during Billy's funeral, sending only a brief condolence card with no return address. Samuel had assumed his brother was simply too busy with his thriving business to attend, but now darker possibilities began to surface. Had Marcus already been spiraling into the addiction and financial ruin that eventually consumed his company? Eleanor's unexpected return to the cabin compound. Samuel's emotional turmoil beyond anything he'd experienced since their divorce. She arrived on a crisp spring morning, driving the same blue Honda Civic she'd owned during their marriage, her auburn hair now shorter and streaked with premature gray that spoke of her own struggles with grief. "I came to get Billy's things," she said quietly, standing in the cabin's doorway, with the hesitant posture of someone entering hostile territory. "I'm finally ready to move forward." Scar's reaction to Eleanor was immediate and striking. The massive bear, who'd shown nothing but gentle affection toward Samuel and Martha, positioned himself protectively between the newcomer and his adoptive father. His posture wasn't aggressive, but rather the careful alertness of a creature assessing potential threats to his family unit. Eleanor's professional composure cracked when she saw the bear. "Jesus Christ, Sam! What is that thing doing here?" "His name is Scar," Samuel replied, his voice carrying a defensive edge that surprised them both. "And he's not a thing. He's family." The confrontation that followed dredged up 3 years of suppressed grief and mutual recrimination. Eleanor accused Samuel of playing house with a dangerous wild animal while their marriage had dissolved from neglect. Samuel countered that she'd abandoned ship when he'd needed her most, choosing to save other people's children instead of helping him heal from losing their own. "You think I don't know what this is about?" Eleanor's voice rose to match his anger. "You couldn't save Billy, so now you're trying to save every wounded creature you find. But that bear isn't our son, Sam. Billy is dead, and no amount of wildlife rescue is going to bring him back." The words hung between them like a physical presence, 3 years of unspoken truth finally given voice. Scar, perhaps sensing the emotional violence of the exchange, moved closer to Samuel and released a low rumble that wasn't quite a growl but carried unmistakable warning. Eleanor stepped back instinctively, her nurse's training warring with her natural fear of large predators. "That animal is dangerous, Sam. What happens when he decides you're not the alpha anymore? What happens when his natural instincts override whatever Stockholm syndrome you've created here?" But Samuel's attention had shifted to something else, a detail he'd missed during the heat of their argument. Eleanor wore a small silver pendant around her neck, one he'd never seen before. It was shaped like a child's handprint, the kind of memorial jewelry that grieving parents sometimes commissioned. "You're pregnant," he said suddenly, the realization hitting him with startling clarity. Eleanor's defensive posture, her careful movements, the slight fullness in her face that he'd attributed to stress, it all made sense now. Eleanor's hand moved instinctively to her still flat stomach, confirming what Samuel had guessed. 16 weeks, she whispered. I didn't come here for Billy's things. I came to tell you, the father. He's a good man, a pediatric surgeon at the hospital. He knows about Billy, about us, about everything. The news should have devastated Samuel, should have confirmed his worst fears about being replaced and forgotten. Instead, watching Eleanor's protective hand cradling new life, he felt something unexpected. Hope. She was moving forward, building something beautiful from the ashes of their shared tragedy. Scar seemed to sense the shift in emotional energy as well. The massive bear approached Eleanor slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. When she didn't retreat, he gently touched his nose to her extended hand, a gesture of acceptance that brought tears to her eyes. I think he knows, she whispered, wonder replacing fear in her voice. About the baby, I mean. Animals are supposed to sense these things, aren't they? Martha's heart attack occurred 3 days after Eleanor's visit, while she was helping Samuel install new security cameras around the cabin perimeter. The 72-year-old woman simply collapsed without warning, clutching her chest as Samuel rushed to perform CPR while frantically radioing for emergency medical assistance. Scar's behavior during the crisis was extraordinary. The bear positioned himself as a windbreak while Samuel worked to keep Martha alive, then led the arriving paramedics directly to their location through the forest's winding trails. When the ambulance finally departed with Martha stable but critical, Scar refused to eat for 3 days, keeping vigil by the cabin door as if waiting for her return. The experience crystallized something fundamental for Samuel. Family wasn't just about blood relationships or species boundaries. It was about choosing to protect and care for others regardless of the personal cost. Martha had chosen to protect him, Eleanor was choosing to build new life despite her fears, and Scar had chosen to stay, despite every natural instinct urging him toward the wild. Samuel's investigation reached its climax when he finally identified the second hunter from the trail camera footage. Cross-referencing the custom rifle configuration with local gun shop records led him to a series of private sales that had occurred shortly after Blackwood Construction's bankruptcy. Someone with intimate knowledge of high-end hunting equipment had been liquidating valuable assets, probably to fund either legal fees or drug purchases. The paper trail led inevitably back to Marcus, but Samuel needed confirmation before confronting his brother. Using contacts from his military days, he traced the GPS tracking data breach to a former Blackwood Construction employee who'd worked part-time for the Wildlife Management Database contractor. The same employee had been arrested 6 months earlier for methamphetamine possession, but had received a suspended sentence in exchange for information about other drug users. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source, Eleanor's new boyfriend, Dr. Michael Chen, who mentioned treating several gunshot wounds during hunting season that hadn't been properly reported to authorities. Professional courtesy prevented him from naming patients, but his description of one particular case, a man with a distinctive hand tattoo who'd claimed to be injured in a hunting accident, matched Marcus's military service tattoo perfectly. Samuel spent the last week before the confrontation preparing for every possible outcome. He updated his will, leaving the cabin and Scar's custody to Martha's nephew in Montana. He wrote detailed letters to Eleanor, to Martha, and even to his brother, explaining his actions and motivations. Most importantly, he spent long hours with Scar, trying to convey through touch and tone that whatever happened next, their bond was real and permanent. The anonymous note arrived on a Tuesday, slipped under his cabin door while he was out on patrol. "Stop looking or join the bear." The message was typed on plain paper, untraceable, but carrying the unmistakable threat of someone who'd been watching Samuel's investigation with growing alarm. That night, Samuel armed himself for the first time since leaving the military. He loaded his service pistol and positioned it within easy reach, while Scar seemed to sense the approaching danger with the acute awareness that had kept his species alive for millions of years. The final confrontation was coming, and Samuel Hayes was ready to face whatever truth awaited him in the darkness of the Cascade Mountain wilderness. The confrontation Samuel had been dreading for months materialized on a moonless October night, emerging from the tree line like a ghost from his past. Marcus Blackwood stepped into the clearing around Samuel's cabin with the hesitant gait of a man carrying too many secrets and too much shame. The red baseball cap from the trail camera footage sat askew on his gaunt head, and the custom hunting rifle Samuel had spent weeks identifying hung loose in his trembling hands. "Hello, Sammy," Marcus said, using the childhood nickname that once carried affection, but now sounded like a curse. "We need to talk." Samuel had been expecting this moment for weeks, ever since the anonymous threat appeared under his door, but seeing his brother's physical deterioration still shocked him. Marcus had lost at least 30 pounds since their last family gathering 4 years ago, his once proud frame now skeletal beneath clothes that hung like empty sacks. His eyes held the hollow desperation of someone who'd traded everything valuable for the next fix, the next temporary escape from reality. "You look like hell, Marcus," Samuel said quietly, his hand resting on the service pistol concealed beneath his jacket. "When's the last time you ate a real meal?" Marcus laughed, a bitter sound that carried no humor. "Food's expensive these days, little brother. Not all of us get steady government paychecks for playing nature boy in the woods." His grip tightened on the rifle, though he hadn't yet raised it to a threatening position. "You always were Dad's favorite, you know that. The responsible one, the one who made smart choices." The accusation hung between them like a physical presence, decades of sibling rivalry finally given voice. Samuel remembered their father's pride when Marcus had started his construction company, the way the old man had bragged to neighbors about his successful eldest son. But he also remembered the subtle disappointments, the way their father's face would tighten whenever Marcus's business dealings strayed into ethical gray areas. "Dad's been dead for 8 years, Marcus. This isn't about him anymore." Samuel kept his voice steady, though his heart was pounding hard enough that he wondered if Marcus could hear it. "This is about what you did to that mother bear. About the cub you left to die in that trap." Marcus's face crumpled at the mention of Scar's mother, guilt and desperation warring across his features. "You don't understand the pressure I was under. Bankruptcy, divorce, losing the house, everything Dad built, everything I worked for, gone because some Wall Street bastards decided to crash the economy. I needed money fast, and those gallbladders. Jesus, Sam, they're worth more than most people make in a year." The confession came pouring out like poison from an infected wound. Marcus detailed his descent into the black market wildlife trade, how desperate financial circumstances had led him to partner with other desperate men. They'd started small, targeting individual animals during legal hunting seasons, but the money was too good and the demand too high to stop there. "The tracking data was easy to steal," Marcus continued, his voice gaining momentum as if confession might somehow absolve him. "Tommy Nguyen owed me money from before his arrest, and he had access to the wildlife database through his temp job. We knew exactly where the mother bears were denning when they'd be most vulnerable." Samuel's stomach turned as the full scope of his brother's operation became clear. This wasn't opportunistic poaching by desperate amateurs. It was systematic slaughter conducted with military precision and insider knowledge. The GPS tracking data theft explained how the poachers had managed to target so many mother bears during their most vulnerable period. "How many?" Samuel asked, dreading the answer. 14 over 2 years, Marcus replied, no longer meeting his brother's eyes. Maybe more. I lost count after a while, when the meth started, when things got really bad. The number hit Samuel like a physical blow. 14 mother bears, each probably supporting multiple cubs. The ecological damage was staggering, representing years of reproductive potential wiped out for short-term profit. But it was the personal dimension that truly devastated him. His own brother had become the kind of monster Samuel had dedicated his career to stopping. Scar chose that moment to emerge from the cabin, his massive form materializing in the doorway with the silent grace that had made his species apex predators for millions of years. The bear's intelligent dark eyes immediately assessed the situation, noting the tension between the two humans and the weapon in Marcus's hands. Marcus stumbled backward at the sight of the enormous black bear, nearly dropping his rifle in shock. Sweet Jesus Christ, what is that thing doing loose? His name is Scar, Samuel said, his voice carrying a protective edge that surprised them both. And he's the cub whose mother you murdered, the one you left to die in that steel trap. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on any of them. Marcus faced the living consequence of his actions, the survivor of his systematic slaughter campaign. Scar, meanwhile, gazed at the man who'd destroyed his family with an intelligence that seemed almost human in its intensity. You can't keep a wild animal as a pet, Marcus said, raising his rifle with shaking hands. That thing's dangerous. It could kill you without warning. Like you killed his mother without warning? Samuel's anger finally boiled over. 3 years of suppressed grief and 6 months of investigation crystallizing into pure rage. Like you left him to starve or die of infection because you were too strung out to check your traps? Marcus's defensive posture cracked under his brother's assault, revealing the broken man beneath the desperate criminal. I never meant for things to go this far. It started as just 1 or 2 kills to get back on my feet, but the money was so good, and the drugs helped me forget what I was doing. By the time I realized how far I'd fallen, I was in too deep to stop. You could have asked for help, Samuel said, his voice softening despite his anger. Family helps family, Marcus. I would have given you anything you needed. Like you helped Eleanor after Billy died? Marcus shot back, his own pain making him cruel. From what I heard, you were too busy drowning in your own guilt to help anybody, including yourself. The accusation stung because it carried truth. Samuel had indeed failed Eleanor during their darkest period, choosing isolation and self-punishment over the hard work of mutual healing. But he'd learned from that failure, learned the importance of choosing connection over comfortable numbness. You're right, Samuel admitted, the acknowledgement clearly surprising his brother. I failed Eleanor, just like I failed Billy. But that doesn't mean I have to keep failing. That doesn't mean I can't protect what's left. Scar seemed to sense the shift in emotional energy between the two brothers, moving closer to Samuel with protective intent. The massive bear positioned himself slightly between the two men, close enough to intervene if necessary, but not so close as to appear immediately threatening. Marcus stared at the bear with a mixture of fear and fascination, perhaps seeing for the first time the intelligence and emotional complexity of the creatures he'd been slaughtering for profit. It really understands, doesn't it? What we're talking about, what happened to its mother? He understands more than most people give him credit for, Samuel replied. Bears have long memories, Marcus. They remember kindness, but they also remember cruelty. The weight of that statement settled over Marcus like a shroud, the implication clear. He was facing not just Samuel's judgment, but the judgment of nature itself in the form of this orphaned bear who'd survived his traps and lived to confront his mother's killer. I can't go to prison, Sam, Marcus whispered, his voice breaking with desperation. I'm too old, too sick, too broken. I wouldn't last 6 months inside. Then help me shut down the rest of the operation, Samuel offered, extending one final lifeline to his brother. Give me names, locations, evidence. Help me make sure no more mothers die for their gallbladders. For a moment, hope flickered in Marcus's hollow eyes. But then the weight of his addiction and desperation reasserted itself, and his grip tightened on the rifle with renewed determination. I can't do that either, Marcus said, raising the weapon with hands that shook from withdrawal and fear. Too many people would want me dead if I talked. The only way out is through, little brother. And that means that Bear dies tonight, along with anyone who tries to stop me. The rifle shot shattered the October silence like thunder, sending a flock of roosting crows exploding from the nearby pines in a cacophony of panicked cries. Samuel felt the bullet's passage as a burning line across his left shoulder, spinning him around and sending him crashing into the cabin's wooden steps. Blood immediately began seeping through his flannel shirt, warm and sticky against his skin. "I'm sorry, Sammy," Marcus cried, his voice breaking as he worked the rifle's bolt action for a second shot. "I'm so goddamn sorry, but I can't let you destroy what's left of my life. That bear is worth 50 grand to the right buyers, and I need that money more than you need to play daddy to a wild animal." Samuel tried to reach for his concealed pistol, but his left arm had gone numb from the gunshot wound. Dark spots danced at the edges of his vision as shock began setting in, his body's natural response to trauma and blood loss. Through the haze of pain, he saw Scar rear up on his hind legs, all 7 feet and 300 pounds of him, releasing a roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the forest. Marcus stumbled backward, nearly dropping his rifle as the massive bear's bellow echoed through the clearing. "Stay back!" he screamed, swinging the weapon toward Scar. "I'll put you down just like I put down your mama." The threat against Scar cut through Samuel's shock like ice water, flooding his system with desperate adrenaline. He managed to roll behind the cabin steps, using the wooden structure as partial cover while fumbling for his service weapon with his good hand. But the movement sent fresh waves of agony through his shoulder, and he could feel consciousness slipping away like water through his fingers. Scar dropped to all fours and began circling Marcus with the patient, methodical movement of a predator assessing its prey. The bear's intelligence was fully on display now, his dark eyes calculating angles and distances while maintaining just enough space to avoid the rifle's effective range. This wasn't the random charge of an enraged animal. This was strategic thinking worthy of any military tactician. "You want to dance, you oversized rat?" Marcus snarled, his withdrawal-ravaged features twisted with manic desperation. "I've killed 14 of your kind, and they all died squealing just like Mama did. Come on then, let's finish this family reunion properly." But Marcus's drug-addled reflexes were no match for a creature that had survived 18 months in the wilderness and inherited millions of years of predatory evolution. As he swung the rifle to track Scar's movement, the bear suddenly changed direction, using a fallen log as a launching point to close the distance in 3 powerful bounds. The rifle fired again, but Marcus's aim was wild with panic and withdrawal tremors. The bullet buried itself harmlessly in a Douglas fir, while Scar's massive paw connected with the weapon, sending it spinning through the air to land in the underbrush 20 feet away. Marcus screamed as razor-sharp claws raked across his chest, opening 4 parallel gashes that immediately began bleeding profusely. Samuel watched helplessly as his brother collapsed, clutching his torn chest while Scar loomed over him like an avenging spirit from nature's darkest mythology. This was the moment of ultimate reckoning, predator and prey locked in the eternal dance that had been playing out since the dawn of time. The bear had every right to exact lethal vengeance for his mother's murder, and Samuel found himself holding his breath, waiting to see what justice looked like when administered by teeth and claws. But instead of delivering the killing blow that Marcus deserved, Scar did something extraordinary. The massive bear gently placed one enormous paw on Marcus's chest, pinning him without crushing him, and leaned down until his dark eyes were inches from the terrified man's face. The message was unmistakable. I could kill you easily, but I choose not to. Marcus whimpered beneath the bear's weight, blood streaming from his chest wounds while his body shook with uncontrollable tremors. "Please," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for what I did to your mama. I'm sick. I'm broken. I need help." Scar held his position for several more seconds, as if weighing the man's words against the enormity of his crimes. Then, with deliberate care, the bear stepped back and released his prisoner. Marcus immediately curled into a fetal position, sobbing with relief and terror while blood continued seeping from his claw marks. Samuel used the cabin steps to pull himself upright, his vision clearing enough to comprehend what he'd just witnessed. Scar had shown mercy to his mother's killer, choosing restraint over revenge despite having every justification for lethal force. It was a demonstration of moral complexity that challenged everything Samuel thought he knew about the line between human and animal consciousness. "He could have killed you," Samuel called out to his brother, his voice weak from blood loss but carrying absolute conviction. "Any wild animal would have killed you for what you did. But Scar chose differently. He chose to be better than the man who murdered his family." Marcus looked up from his defensive curl, his hollow eyes focusing on the massive bear with something approaching wonder. "Why?" he whispered. "Why didn't it kill me?" "Because he's learned something about mercy that you forgot a long time ago," Samuel replied, finally managing to extract his pistol with his good hand. "Because he understands that some wounds need to heal instead of fester." The sound of approaching sirens began filtering through the forest, growing louder with each passing second. Eleanor's voice crackled through Samuel's radio, which had somehow survived his fall. "Sam, are you okay? Martha called the sheriff when she heard gunshots. Help is coming." Samuel keyed the radio with trembling fingers. "I'm hit, but alive. Marcus is here and wounded. We need paramedics and wildlife control." He paused, looking at Scar, who had positioned himself protectively between the two brothers. "And Eleanor? Tell them to approach slowly. We've got a guardian angel here, and I don't want anyone making any sudden moves." As the sirens grew closer, Samuel realized that this confrontation had changed all three of them forever. Marcus would face justice for his crimes, but he might also find the redemption that had eluded him for so long. Scar had proven himself capable of mercy beyond anything Samuel had imagined possible, and Samuel himself had finally learned the difference between protecting something and simply failing to lose it. The reckoning was complete, but the healing had only just begun. The truth that emerged during Marcus's recovery changed everything Samuel thought he understood about his brother's descent into darkness. As Marcus lay sedated in the county hospital's secure wing, hooked to IVs and monitors while deputies maintained a constant watch, he began revealing details that painted a far more complex picture than simple greed and addiction. The first bear wasn't even intentional, Marcus confessed, during one of Samuel's visits, his voice barely above a whisper as morphine battled the pain from Scar's claw marks. "I was scouting timberland for a development project that never materialized, carrying Dad's old hunting rifle for protection. This massive sow charged me near her den, and I panicked, shot her dead center right through the heart." Samuel sat beside his brother's hospital bed, his own shoulder immobilized in a sling that reminded him constantly of how close he'd come to joining Billy in whatever realm awaited beyond this life. Eleanor had insisted on driving him to these daily visits, her growing pregnancy making her protective instincts extend even to the man who'd nearly killed her ex-husband. "That's when Tommy Nguyen found me," Marcus continued, staring at the ceiling tiles as if they held absolution for his sins. I was standing over this dead bear crying like a baby when he came walking out of the woods with a GPS unit and a skinning knife. Turned out he'd been tracking her for weeks, waiting for the perfect opportunity. The revelation struck Samuel like a physical blow. Tommy Nguyen, the database contractor who'd provided GPS tracking information to the poaching ring, hadn't been Marcus's subordinate as Samuel had assumed. He'd been the architect of the entire operation, manipulating desperate men like Marcus into becoming his field operatives while he remained safely behind the scenes. Tommy said the gallbladder alone was worth 15 grand, more than I'd made in 6 months of failed construction bids, Marcus whispered, tears streaming down his gaunt cheeks. He said it wasn't really poaching if we were just harvesting animals that were going to die anyway from overpopulation and habitat loss. He made it sound like we were doing the ecosystem a favor. Eleanor, who'd been listening silently from the corner chair, finally spoke up. Classic manipulation tactics, she said, her nurse's training helping her recognize the psychological patterns. Find someone vulnerable, give them rationalization for their actions, make them dependent on your approval and financial support. Tommy was running a cult, essentially, with wildlife poaching as the sacrament. Samuel's investigation had already uncovered most of Tommy Nguyen's network, but hearing Marcus describe the recruitment process filled in crucial psychological details. Tommy had specifically targeted men who'd lost everything, their businesses, their families, their sense of self-worth, and offered them a way to reclaim their masculine identity through successful hunting while generating desperately needed income. The mother bears were Tommy's idea too, Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger as confession began lifting the weight of secrets he'd carried for years. He said females with cubs were easier targets because they were predictable, following the same denning patterns year after year. Said we were actually being merciful by taking the mothers quickly, instead of letting them starve when habitat destruction forced them into competition with each other. Martha Whitfield arrived during the middle of Marcus's confession, her post-cardiac event fragility contrasting sharply with the steel in her eyes as she listened to the details of systematic slaughter. She'd insisted on hearing the truth firsthand, claiming that her 72 years on Earth had earned her the right to look evil in the face and call it by name. That boy was a predator, Martha said after Marcus finished describing Tommy's recruitment tactics. Not the kind that kills for food or territory, but the worst kind. The kind that kills healthy communities by turning neighbor against neighbor, brother against brother. Samuel had to agree with Martha's assessment. Tommy Nguyen's operation had been far more than simple poaching. It had been a systematic corruption of men who'd already been broken by economic forces beyond their control. By offering them a way to feel powerful and productive again, Tommy had transformed victims into victimizers while insulating himself from the worst consequences of their actions. "Where is Tommy now?" Samuel asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Gone," Marcus replied, his voice flat with resignation. "Disappeared the day after you found Mama Bear's remains. Probably somewhere in Southeast Asia by now, living off the money we made him while we faced the consequences of what he convinced us to do." The bitter irony wasn't lost on any of them. The man who'd orchestrated the destruction of 14 bear families had escaped justice entirely, while his desperate recruits faced federal charges that could result in decades in prison. Tommy Nguyen had played the system perfectly, using other people's desperation as a shield against accountability. Eleanor's pregnancy had progressed noticeably during the weeks since the confrontation, her protective hand resting constantly on her expanding belly, as if she could shield her unborn child from the darkness they'd all witnessed. She'd made the decision to stay in Oregon temporarily, moving into Martha's ranch house to help with the older woman's recovery while maintaining proximity to Samuel during his own healing process. "I keep thinking about Scar's mother," Eleanor said one evening as they sat on Martha's front porch, watching the sun set over the Cascade Mountains. How she led those men away from her cub, knowing she was going to die but doing it anyway. That's the kind of parent I want to be, the kind who'd give everything to protect their child. Samuel understood what she wasn't saying directly. Their shared failure to protect Billy had created a chasm between them that seemed unbridgeable, but watching Scar's capacity for both forgiveness and fierce protection had shown them a different model for how families could function. Love didn't require perfection, but it did require the willingness to keep choosing each other despite inevitable failures and disappointments. Scar himself had become something of a local legend during Samuel's recovery period. Dr. Patricia Wells, the wildlife supervisor who'd once threatened Samuel's career for harboring an illegal animal, had personally authorized Scar's permanent residency status after witnessing his remarkable intelligence and restraint during the confrontation with Marcus. That bear demonstrated cognitive and emotional complexity that challenges our fundamental assumptions about wildlife consciousness. Dr. Wells had written in her official report, his ability to show mercy to a mortal enemy while protecting his adoptive family suggests intelligence levels that demand our respect rather than our dominance. The decision to grant Scar permanent sanctuary status had opened doors for groundbreaking research into human-wildlife emotional bonds, with universities from across the country requesting permission to study his unique relationship with Samuel. But Samuel had been selective about access, insisting that any research must benefit Scar's well-being rather than simply advance human knowledge. As autumn deepened into early winter, Samuel began to understand that the confrontation with Marcus had been just the beginning of a much larger transformation. The man who'd pulled a dying cub from a steel trap 18 months earlier no longer existed. In his place stood someone who'd learned that family wasn't about blood or species, but about the daily choice to protect and nurture those who'd chosen to trust you with their vulnerable hearts. The truth had set them all free, even Marcus, who now faced the possibility of redemption through honest accountability for his actions. 6 months after the confrontation that nearly cost Samuel his life, the cabin clearing had been transformed into something that resembled hope made manifest. Eleanor's pregnancy had reached full term, and her expanding belly served as a daily reminder that life persisted even in the wake of devastating loss. She moved through Martha's ranch house with the careful grace of a woman carrying precious cargo, one hand always resting protectively on her unborn child. Scar had appointed himself as the unofficial guardian of Eleanor's pregnancy, displaying an intuitive understanding of her condition that amazed everyone who witnessed it. The massive bear would position himself near her whenever she sat on the porch, his intelligent dark eyes constantly scanning for potential threats. When she walked the paths around Martha's property, Scar would trail behind at a respectful distance, never intrusive, but always vigilant. "That bear knows there's a baby coming," Martha observed one crisp morning as they watched Scar gently nudge Eleanor away from a loose board on the porch steps. "Animals can sense these things long before we humans catch on. He's preparing to protect the next generation of his chosen family." Samuel's own healing had progressed remarkably well, both physically and emotionally. The gunshot wound had left him with limited mobility in his left shoulder, but physical therapy was gradually restoring his range of motion. More importantly, the psychological wounds that had festered since Billy's death were finally beginning to heal properly, aided by regular conversations with a grief counselor Eleanor had recommended. The legal proceedings against Marcus had taken an unexpected turn when federal prosecutors offered him a plea bargain in exchange for comprehensive testimony against the broader poaching network. Rather than facing decades in federal prison, Marcus would serve 3 years in minimum security while participating in an innovative rehabilitation program that combined addiction treatment with environmental restoration work. He'll be helping rebuild wildlife habitat instead of destroying it, Samuel explained to Martha during one of their Tuesday evening conversations. The judge said it was fitting justice, making him spend his remaining productive years giving back to the ecosystem he damaged. Marcus had embraced the opportunity for redemption with the enthusiasm of a man who'd been given an unexpected second chance at life. His letters from the federal facility in Colorado were filled with details about reforestation projects and wildlife corridor construction, work that seemed to be healing his soul even as it rebuilt damaged landscapes. Dr. Patricia Wells had become an unexpected ally in Samuel's efforts to establish the cabin as an official wildlife sanctuary. The dramatic footage of Scar showing mercy to Marcus had captured international attention, drawing researchers and conservationists from around the world who wanted to study the unique bond between human and bear. We're proposing to designate this entire area as the Cascade Mountain Human-Wildlife Coexistence Research Center, Dr. Wells explained during a site visit with potential funders. Samuel and Scar represent a new model for how humans and large predators can develop mutually beneficial relationships based on respect rather than dominance. The research center designation would provide Samuel with a steady income while allowing him to continue his work with Scar in an official capacity. More importantly, it would protect the land from future development and ensure that other orphaned wildlife could receive the same kind of patient, loving care that had saved Scar's life. Eleanor's labor began on a Thursday morning in late spring, almost exactly 1 year after Samuel had first found Scar trapped and dying. Martha had been teaching Eleanor to braid wildflowers when the contractions started, a peaceful domestic scene that transformed into controlled urgency as they prepared for the drive to the hospital. Scar seemed to understand immediately that something momentous was happening. As Eleanor walked carefully to Martha's truck, the massive bear positioned himself between her and the forest, as if protecting her from any threats that might emerge from the wilderness. His deep, rumbling vocalizations carried none of the aggression Samuel had witnessed during the confrontation with Marcus. Instead, they sounded almost like encouragement, the kind of supportive presence that any laboring mother would appreciate. "That bear's singing her a lullaby," Martha said with tears in her eyes as they helped Eleanor into the passenger seat. "I've seen a lot of births in my 72 years, but I've never seen anything like this." Samuel chose to stay behind with Scar rather than accompany Eleanor to the hospital, recognizing that his presence might complicate an already emotionally complex situation. Eleanor's new partner, Dr. Michael Chen, would be there to provide the support she needed, while Samuel's role was to maintain the sanctuary that would welcome their growing family home. The hours of waiting stretched into an eternity, with Samuel and Scar keeping vigil on the cabin porch, while Martha sent periodic updates via text message. Scar remained unusually alert throughout the day, his ears constantly swiveling toward sounds that Samuel couldn't detect, as if he was monitoring Eleanor's progress from 30 miles away. When Martha's truck finally returned at sunset, carrying Eleanor and a carefully bundled infant, Scar's reaction was immediate and profound. The massive bear rose to his full height on his hind legs, releasing a vocalization that Samuel had never heard before, a deep, melodious sound that carried across the clearing like a song of welcome. Eleanor emerged from the truck with careful, exhausted movements, cradling her newborn daughter against her chest. The baby was tiny and perfect, with wisps of auburn hair that matched her mother's and alert blue eyes that seemed to take in everything around her with remarkable focus. "Her name is Hope," Eleanor said softly as she approached the cabin steps where Samuel and Scar waited. "Hope Margaret Chen Hayes, after the woman who taught us all about the power of chosen family." Martha's tears flowed freely at the honor, her weathered hands trembling as she reached out to stroke the baby's impossibly soft cheek. "Well, "Aren't you just the most beautiful thing?" she whispered. "Your mama and daddy and your big brother bear have been waiting so long to meet you." Scar's introduction to Hope was conducted with extraordinary gentleness. The massive bear approached slowly, his movements careful and deliberate as Eleanor lowered the bundle so he could investigate the new addition to their family. When Scar extended his enormous snout to gently sniff the baby's blanket, Hope reached out with one tiny fist and grasped a tuft of his thick fur. The connection was immediate and unmistakable. Hope gazed up at Scar with the fearless curiosity of someone who'd never learned that bears were supposed to be dangerous, while Scar regarded her with an expression of protective devotion that would have melted the hardest heart. "She's not afraid of him at all," Samuel marveled, watching the interaction with wonder. "Why would she be?" Eleanor replied, settling into the rocking chair that Martha had placed on the porch specifically for this moment. "To her, Uncle Scar is just part of the family. She doesn't know that this isn't how the world usually works." As the sun set behind the Cascade Mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Samuel realized that they'd created something unprecedented in this remote clearing, a family that transcended species boundaries, bound together not by genetics, but by the conscious choice to protect and nurture each other, despite all the ways the world tried to tear them apart. Hope Margaret Chen Hayes would grow up knowing that love came in many forms, that family was about commitment rather than blood, and that even the wildest hearts could choose gentleness when it mattered most. The future stretched before them, uncertain but filled with possibility, protected by the fierce love of an adopted bear who'd learned that mercy was stronger than revenge. Sometimes the family we need isn't the one we're born into, but the one that chooses to stay when we're broken. Samuel Hayes learned this truth in the most unexpected way, through a wounded bear cub whose capacity for forgiveness taught him that love transcends every boundary we think matters. When Scar chose mercy over revenge, protecting the very man who'd destroyed his world, he showed us something profound about the nature of healing. Real family isn't about shared DNA or perfect circumstances. It's about the daily decision to protect and nurture those who've trusted us with their vulnerable hearts. Eleanor's return, Marcus's redemption, Martha's wisdom, and Little Hope's fearless love all prove that it's never too late to rebuild what seemed irreparably broken. The scars we carry don't have to define us. They can become the foundation for something beautiful, something stronger than what came before. In a world that often feels cold and disconnected, Samuel's story reminds us that unconditional love still exists, that second chances are possible, and that the bonds we choose can be more powerful than the ones we inherit. Sometimes, healing comes with fur and claws, teaching us that family is found in the most unexpected places. What moments in your own life have taught you that family extends beyond blood relationships? Have you ever experienced the healing power of forgiveness in an unexpected way? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your stories of chosen family and second chances.